People are stupid. Vote for me. Hey there, language splainies. Well, I'm here today because I'm taking up a challenge, more or less. Someone that I listen to every day, Scott Adams, I listen to his Periscope every morning, said something the other day that I disagree with. He insisted, absolutely, contemptuously, laughingly, that socialists do not want to control people. And he sort of got his comic on and said, look, there's no one going around saying, let's control people, let's control people. And he ridiculed the notion that there are 50 million people with this secret. However, I think there's another way of looking at this. Now, as I've said before, people can't always articulate their own arguments, even in their own minds. I was referring mainly to people who are oppressed, people who've been deprived of language, but I think it's worth asking whether or not this is true of oppressors as well, whether they can articulate their motives to themselves. And let's just take this to socialists. I mean, if you pushed a few socialists, would they actually know whether they were doing this for the common good or whether it's because they feel kind of antsy about the need for control? Would they be able to justify putting themselves in the place of the arbiters and those who define the common good? And I've also talked about certain ideologues who established a totalitarian dictatorship without ever firing a shot by depriving their subjects of language. They also later cemented their power with terror. These alingual dogs going around growling on Animal Farm, who you couldn't reason with, whom you couldn't ask any questions of, were the ones who kept the peace, so to speak. And yes, this is Animal Farm, which is communism, not socialism. Communism being a system in which you have two cows, the government takes them away and gives you the milk. Socialism being you have two cows and the government takes one of them and gives it to your neighbor. But there's still systems in which the government has control of the resources, and every bit of control that the government has is less for you. I think the question of whether these decisions are being made for your good and the common good is easily settled by simply looking at socialist governments, past and present. Look at their methods, look at their results. Like I say, I think the question is answered right there. But if you're not convinced, let's keep talking. Now, as I've said, people get antsy when they feel that societal controls are too light. And sure enough, there's a concept to help out with that called nudge. It's, it's a behavioral science. It's a political philosophy. It's a floor wax. It's also a book written by someone who served in Barack Obama's administration. And the foundation of this concept is that people are just too irrational and lazy and stingy and uninformed to make good decisions for themselves and ultimately for the common good. So what's needed are these choice architects of choice, who shape, who limit your choices and who sequence your choices or arrange your choices in such a way that you will make what they consider the right decisions. In other words, they nudge you towards what they consider to be your best path. Now, setting aside the question of who decides what your best path is and who gets to make these choices, I wonder, really, they're constrained by, in America, they're constrained by the Constitution. They can only nudge. They can't, take a hammer. But I really wonder, if they weren't constrained, how far would they go? If you consider that the foundation of this concept is that you and I are just too stupid to make these decisions, then I don't see how you uncouple the so-called common good from control. I think control is at least half the goal. Now, interestingly, I know someone like this, and she's a conservative. She calls herself conservative. She votes that way. And she wants to get into governance. She's as a teenager, she would walk around the state capitol and say, I want to be doing this someday. I want to be doing what these people are doing. And in other conversations with her, I think I found out her motive. Now, for instance, one day we're sitting around talking about, somehow the topic of dogs being locked in cars comes up. And she adamantly insisted that people who leave their dogs in cars with the windows rolled up ought to be punished severely. They ought to go to jail, not even have an option of paying a fine. And she defended this choice. She explained it by saying, people are stupid. These were her exact words. people are stupid, so you have to make these laws. She didn't say, you have to prevent the suffering, you have to protect dumb creatures from needless suffering. She wasn't talking about it from the dog's point of view. It was these stupid people. In another conversation, brace yourself, abortion came up, and she said she felt that it should be outlawed. I said, why? And she said, because people should be responsible. She didn't say she was pro-life. She didn't talk about defending a life. She talked about whipping these adults into line and getting them to straighten out their sexual habits. It was about sex. And there's a problem with trying to draw out her principles on this, because when you question her, she gets hostile and she clams up. You know what? I don't want to talk about this. Now, by the time she's running for office 10 or 12 years from now, she's going to sound very different. She's not going to go into a room full of people and say, people are stupid, vote for me. No, 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 no. It's going to be, think of the puppies, vote for me. So there you go. Both sides do it. And that is why I don't take sides. And that's why I do agree with Scott Adams that everyone wants power. Everyone does it. But I will say this. When conservatives or capitalists or libertarians, whatever, when the non-socialists, when they do this sort of thing, they are considered to be failing their ideals. When they do this sort of thing, their constituents are going to say, hey, look, you promised me freedom and instead you increased the regulation, and what do you know? All my money is going to your donors. Whereas when socialists fail their voters, it's going to be something like, hey, you promised you were going to make me a winner. I've still got no cows, and my neighbor has 2 cows. When are you going to get busy and make him a loser? In other words, socialists expect control. But let's keep talking. The power clearly belongs to the guy who picks the winners and losers in socialism. And I'll tell you, one area where I feel like a big loser is in speech codes. My taxes go to fund offices in the state, in various cities, on college campuses that are writing codes to limit my speech. And gosh, college students, I guess they're paying fees that go to fund offices that also create these affirmative consent laws. Yeah, affirmative consent. I mean, these are laws that tell you when you have to speak. I mean, there you are having sex with someone behind closed doors in the dark, and you've got to give this consent at each step of the way, everything that you're doing in bed. But I'm not the most eloquent speaker on this topic, at least not as long as the British is around. He's someone else that I listen to on a regular basis. Give that video a click and tell me if you still believe that people who take our resources and make decisions, you use our resources to set up structures and make decisions that deprive us of our speech and that create censorship are doing this for our own good. But let's keep talking. Another example Scott Adams gave of a benevolent socialist government in action is action on climate change. Now, this surprises me a little bit because as far as I'm concerned, the mask completely came off a couple of weeks ago. Now, I'm sure Scott Adams is familiar with this story, and how he interprets it as anything but evidence of deceptiveness is beyond me. Chakrabarti, of course, is the brains behind Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's Green New Deal, which is such a huge deal. I barely need to talk about it, but I will say it's actually being used now as the standard in the Democratic Party debates, Democratic presidential debates. People are being asked, how do you feel about the Green New Deal, and whether you're in favor of it or less in favor of it, if you feel it needs more details or whatever. That's considered to be your level of commitment to preventing climate catastrophe. So in July of this year, Chakrabarti, who incidentally is now the former chief of staff of AOC, is talking to a Washington Post reporter, and he says, the interesting thing about the Green New Deal is it wasn't originally a climate thing at all. Do you guys think of it as a climate thing? Because we really think of it as a how do you change the entire economy thing. Now, really, I mean, there it is, this fig leaf of environmental protection on this colossus of total economic change. And this video that AOC participated in the production of spells that out.
12 years to change everything. How we got around, how we fed ourselves, how we made our stuff, how we lived and worked, everything.
My God, there it is. I mean, we're talking about complete upheavals in agriculture, manufacturing, transportation, construction, housing. And of course, this is going to affect your daily life from the moment you get up in the morning and brew your cup of kofifi for your simultaneous sip until you fall into bed and you start going through your affirmative consent obligations so that you can have sex with your partner. But the most significant change of all, I think, she reveals at the end.
And we didn't just change the infrastructure, we changed how we did things. We became a society that was not only modern and wealthy, but dignified and humane too. By committing to universal rights like healthcare and meaningful work for all, we stopped being so scared of the future. We stopped being scared of each other. And we found our shared purpose.
So there it is, our souls, us, the way we view the world, the way we interact intimately. Now, she presents this emergence of the new man as sort of a happy side effect. It's just something that happened, what do you know, after these years and years of radical, sudden, traumatic economic change. But as I think about this change that's supposed to come over me after years of coercion, after years of forcing me to change my daily habits, years of telling me how to speak and think, I can only foresee that this new me will be newly amenable to governance by people like AOC.